Good morning, Michelle.
Good morning.
Thank you so very much for joining me today. As it's such a delight to see you as always. I am
Thank
just
you.
going to, you're welcome. I'm just going to take a moment just to greet whoever is going to be watching this. My name is Dr. Alice Farrell, and I'm the president of Olive Branch Clinical and Consulting Services. I am excited about these interviews that I'm doing with individuals around the world. And today we have our very own Michelle-Stewart-Copes, who has been phenomenal worker in the field for decades, doing work in regard to child welfare early on in her life, do a lot of work in terms of community organizing and working within the faith community as well as the provider network, a lot of organization in terms of consulting when we're thinking about what's currently going on around race relations, equity, looking at disparities and institutional racism, very diverse in terms of her career and as far as her relationship within communities across the board. Again, within the faith community as well as the provider network community. So let me, without further ado, let me have Michelle to introduce herself as a consultant and whatever else you'd like to share before we jump into the few questions, Michelle. Go right ahead.
Sure. Well, I started my own business, which I'm really happy about and very proud of. It's the System for Education Equity and Transition. It's SEET Consultants, and it's a LLC. And I did it because moving from child welfare to the wraparound practice model, which is really looking at people holistically and connecting them to the community, really fulfilled a lot of my desires in life and also my purpose. I feel that that's why I'm here, to really be able to help people to connect to themselves, their family, and their community. And I feel like everything has come full circle for me and that I'm really able to do my life's passion. So I'm really excited about that. I really wanted to be able to connect churches with all the problems that we go through with behavioral health. When I got saved, I had talked to my minister that I got my MSW, but as I read the Bible from front to back, I saw that the MSW is really fulfilled and exemplified within the Bible. And that was a huge revelation for me. And I was really excited about that. So that is my mission in life, to really bring that to the forefront for behavioral health.
Michelle, thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm remembering when Wraparound came to Connecticut, Department of Children and Families was doing a piece of work around there. But before then, you were traveling. You were traveling,
Yes.
bringing Wraparound to other parts of the nation. Can you share
Yes.
just a little bit about those early years? Because I want to tie it later on with the community work.
Oh, yes. And that is my passion as a community organizer. But I was so fortunate to be able to get connected with a company, which was Vune Vandenberg at the time, to do wraparound consultation. So I was certifying staff and administrators in the wraparound practice model. But in doing that, I was able to work with the three fathers of wraparound in this country. And the person that brought wraparound into this country is Carl Dennis from Chicago. And a lot of people don't realize that. He brought it into this country in 1975, and it was all about taking the community back and really taking ownership of the community and really being able to solve the ills of the community themselves. And a lot of people do not see wraparound in that view. But John Vandenberg did, who was mentored by Carl Dennis, and he had me go out to 20 states to do this work and Canada. So I got a lot of different views culturally about how people could do the wraparound practice model, including I worked with a Native American tribe, the Chippewa Indians in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, and they had done it with their elders and with the territory and with the tribal nation, because they said, we don't do community, we have our territory. And it just really educated me about everyone's worldview and how everything can work together for the good of all if we just understand everyone's worldview and work with it to be culturally appropriate.
Michelle, thank you so much. I really wanted the audience who would be actually watching this to really hear that because the late Dr. Janet Williams, she sat at tables with you and myself and faith
Yes.
leaders, and your passion around we can do this together. I remember you bringing the leader at that time to the table with Reverend Lane and some others.
Yes.
Walker.
Yes.
I mean, we were all
Oh
sitting at the
my.
table figuring this thing out together, right? And so that passion, this thing that you're doing now, it goes so far back. And it's not something
Yes.
that you've just imagined now. And I really want that to be communicated. So when you share about what you're doing at this time, that they have some context to where your passion comes from, right? All right.
Yes.
So
Yes.
with that, I've been really speaking a lot, Michelle, about the intersection of COVID-19, the civil unrest,
Yes.
that's based on institutional racism, systemic structural oppression, white supremacy, white privilege, and all those elements. And I've also been sharing on the various platforms about the shadow pandemic, where we're seeing globally the increase in domestic violence and intimate partnership violence. And then, of course, we have the opiate epidemic still going and so many other things behind the
Yes.
scene, right? And when we think about communities, if we don't have an understanding, like you were just sharing, about the different perspectives, the diverse perspective, the understanding the communities themselves, not just in terms of geography, but the cultures within the cultures and the subcultures within the subcultures. And I'm
Yes.
saying that deliberately because folk who do not understand community organizing or the work of community may miss all of the subculture layers as they're attempting to go in. So if we can just take a moment to for me to ask you to share just briefly about your perspective about um, 2020, the year 2020, and up to the last couple of months of 2021. Your experiences, things you've learned, impact that you might have had, and challenges you might have experienced. You could take it anywhere you want, Michelle. We just want to hear from you, your perspective on what's been going on.
Thank you. Well, I've learned an awful lot and received a lot of insight based on my work. I have been doing implicit bias training for a long time, and I've been doing cultural and linguistic competency training for a long time. But COVID-19 really brought the reality of who people were to the forefront so that people really could see and experience the individual racism, the systemic racism, and the structural racism, and the institutionalized racism that is existing. We had talked about it before, but now people could truly see and feel and experience it. And it was true of me also. Usually, when I was doing implicit bias training, I would not hear the racist feelings and comments coming from people. But because of the political role model that we had during that time, people were just feeling free and enabled and emboldened to be able to do that, to express themselves. So I realized that I had to speak to these folks and to truly reach them in order for people to understand equity and to get to the outcome of equity. And I wasn't really seeing the real spirits in people before. And I truly see it now. And it's a godsend. COVID-19 is really a godsend to this country to talk about the urgency of our work, how we really had the time as of this time right now, we have to really take advantage of for such a time as this. I quote that a lot. We really have to take advantage and really make sure that we are pushing for equity, advocating for all of those who are lost and oppressed, and to really make sure that we are implementing policy so that we can see differences. So I saw that with my implicit bias training, that I had to speak to the racists. I had to speak to the white supremacists. I had to define white supremacy. I had to define white privilege so that people could see it. And I had to make people realize that we have two real basic emotions in this world. We have love and we have fear. And people basically naturally fear differences. They fear what is uncomfortable to them. So in order to create community, we have to expose all of this and bring people beyond their fears to understanding and love so that we can gel together to be able to make sure that we're all fighting and working in the same direction for equity for all. And a lot of people do not believe in equity for all. So we have to understand that, know that we'll never probably bring people on board with that because of cognitive dissonance. And I've been really understanding that so many people are just wrapped up in their idea of what they should do and who should have, like the have and the have-nots should occur because of capitalism, because they don't want to go to socialism or communism. We really have to make sure that we keep ours. We have to make sure that we have policy to make sure that those people have to practice for equitable standards, or they get fired, or they just have to leave.
Michelle, thank you so much for sharing that. You've shared just so much in what you just gave us there. And I'm seeing the micro level type work that you're speaking about, the meso and the macro level. So I'm hearing the different strategies that you're putting out there for anyone that's listening. So Michelle, speak to me just a little bit about this. I just posted something that said no more sandwiching of equity between diversity and inclusion. And the reason I did that is because in all the work that I'm doing, like you, lots of work around equity and addressing the drivers of social determinants of health and things of that nature, is I'm hearing people speak about diversity, equity, inclusion. But in actuality, when you look at the work, equity is nowhere in the work. Equity is nowhere present. It's not even a thought of, it's not a thought. It's on paper as DEI, but in the work itself, there is a focus on diversity to some degree. There's a focus on inclusion. And while they intersect and equity, the idea is if we focus on diversity and inclusion, equity is going to happen. But if it's not intentional, if it doesn't have its own unique space, we fall into the same trap with looking at strategies that actually uphold institutional racism and the societal constraints that other strategies have. So I'd like you to just speak a little bit about your experience with seeing and hearing DEI work.
Yes. There's a slide that I use, and I guess a lot of people see it, where they compare equality with equity. And we talk about leveling the playing field for everybody. And a lot of people do not understand that because so many people believe, and a lot of Christians will say that, well, let's just take care of everybody and just make sure that everybody gets the same thing. Then we'll have equity. Just make sure that we have everybody on board, and then equity will be achieved. And they don't understand that they have to look at everyone's individual condition, individual culture to make sure that you're going to have optimal health for that person within the way they describe and receive well-being. So you have to do work to get to equity. Equity does not just happen. There has to be policy about looking at individual differences, individual preferences, individual values, and individual culture in order to truly understand people and to love them for who they are and where they are. So that's really hard a lot of times for people to get. I talk about color blindness, and this is a wake-up call for people because they just said we just need to see everybody as the same. Then we'll be so equal. And I tell people about incidents where an Irish friend of mine had said that, Michelle, I just love you for who you are. I don't see your color. I just love you for who you are. But I had to tell her that you have to see my color in order to understand who I am. You have to understand my African American condition, my African American culture, my pride being an African American, and how I was oppressed, discriminated against, and spit on and called the N-word as an African American when I was a child in order to understand me. So when she was able to hear that, then she says, okay, I get it. And we had a great conversation because she talked about her ancestors coming from Ireland, going through Ellis Island, being discriminated against, living in a ghetto where Italians didn't like them, other blacks didn't like them, and they really felt less than. She says, we have a lot of similarities. And I tell people don't like to talk about differences, but until you talk about differences, you will not be able to bond around your similarities. So we have to go through that basic understanding of how equity is different from what people see as equality to get people there.
Beautiful, Michelle. Thank you so much. I'm sure anyone that will be listening to this will walk away with something from all that you just shared there. And so let's just touch on another element. I've been speaking to a number of people, and they classify themselves as white. And what I'm hearing is white guilt. The idea that once they're here and they're learning and their eyes are open, that they feel guilty or feel ashamed of their lack of involvement or wokeness, so to speak, as some of them said.
Right.
And what I've been saying all along is that while that may be the case, the idea here is that you, speaking to the individuals, think about how you can leverage that privilege that is already embedded in you in terms of your identified race. And so rather than staying in this space of guilt, think about how you can leverage your network, your resources, your finances, your intellectual properties, etc., to deal with and address the institutional racism and the lack of allowance for the voices of the traditionally marginalized and disenfranchised. And so that's one of the pieces that I'm dealing with and helping individuals. Can you speak to some of that or what your experiences have been?
Absolutely. I've been doing a lot of facilitation of town hall meetings because of Black Lives Matter. I did about 11 of them. I did it for staff and I did it for some coalitions and collaborations. And inevitably, a white person would say, I feel so badly. I feel ashamed of my color. I feel like I can't say anything. I don't know what to do because I'm white. You know, what can I do within this Black Lives Matter movement? I know I have privilege and I feel like, you know, I've been trying to demonstrate in civil rights marches, but now I don't know what to do. So I talk about their white privilege can be turned into white responsibility, to take responsibility, as you said, to use that leverage to speak up when they see inequality, because they are in the circles where eligibility guidelines are being developed, policy is being developed, and so often people don't realize because implicit bias is unconscious. People don't realize that they're practicing white supremacy when they are in those rooms making decisions. So if they can consciously think, who's being left out here? Whose consideration is not being brought into the forefront? Who is not being considered for this position? Who is left out when we're looking at this criteria? Then you can really be able to use that leverage to build equity and to make sure that it's not going to be same old, because same old is white supremacy. You just can't see it.
Wow. If I'm not mistaken, I think I just have all those questions that can be used as a pre-screening assessment that someone can do for themselves as they're sitting at those
Yes,
tables, right?
yes,
Yeah,
yes,
we just put out some things there, who, what, and so forth.
yes, yes.
Michelle,
And
it's
it's so interesting that you, and I just wanted to say, it's so interesting that you said assessment, because what we've learned with implicit bias training is that we have to have people to do a self-assessment beforehand. You talk about being woke. So a lot of times if people will do that, they can become woke to themselves, because implicit bias, when you get to the outcomes of really looking at minimizing that, you have to do a self-assessment and a self-critique, because I have to do that with myself. I've been a diversity trainer for so long, but I have to be aware of my biases, and I have a lot of them, and I have to be aware of that so that I can continually practice equity.
beautiful, beautiful, Michelle. So I'm going to pull this around now because sometimes we speak about this work on the individual level, and sometimes in other spaces, we're not looking at the institutions themselves. And one of the pieces that I'm noticing is that recently there's been a lot of anti-racism type statements that have come out from organizations. Just like years ago, there were statements about cultural competency related agency. But when you went inside of the agency as a consultant or just speaking to some of the staff members, you and I know that it's that department, that unit within that department that's really focusing on cultural competence at that time. And it's not really throughout the agency, right? And
Right.
similarly, um, just based on just trainings that I've done and listening to staff members, the anti-racism related statements are just statements, not really values within an organization that's demonstrated through its policies and practices.
Right.
But up front, it's saying we are not going to stand for racism and all the other nuances related to that. Can you speak to that element? And the reason I'm bringing it up is because providers, practitioners who are transparent, they will tell you right off the bat, they're saying it on the front, but behind the scene in our agency, I'm experiencing racism. I am experiencing microaggression. I am being treated unfairly and things of that nature. So let's speak a little bit about the institutions and their responsibility and the accountability element.
Yeah, and Alice, I'm going to go back to that basic framework of thinking, is that a lot of agencies really feel that equity is just about treating everyone the same, really making sure that they have policies in place where people are having access. Everybody is able to get the same thing, but that isn't equity at all. And it isn't inclusion. You have to see color and respond to color. So that whole thing about color appreciation, cultural appreciation, cultural inclusion is work that you have to do differently. And agencies don't see that. That's why they usually need a consultant to come in, or they need to hear from everyone in the agency. And a lot of people don't understand microaggressions. They don't understand how it comes from them verbally, or how people feel it in the atmosphere or in the climate. And they don't understand how body language communicates microaggressions, how body language can really make an environment hostile. where someone can say, I feel discriminated in this environment. I feel like this is a hostile environment to work in. A lot of administrators don't have a clue because they don't know how it feels for a person of color to live and breathe in their environment. So you have to really have someone to come in. You have to become woke, per se. You have to really be able to become sensitive to it. And that is what's happening a lot when you originally talked about from 2020 to 21. So many executive directors are realizing that their environment is truly toxic. They never felt it, but now they're able to hear from others what they're feeling within their environment. And now they have to make a change. They may not know how to make the change, but they really have to include all of the cultural voices, the linguistic voices, in order to make that change, in order to be educated about how to do it. Because if you have been living in white supremacist culture, if you are a white supremacist person, and I've talked to a person who had white privilege, and she realized how she was teaching white privilege to her kids and how it comes generationally without her even realizing it, you won't know how to work differently until you're working with people to talk about what equity means to them.
Wonderful, Michelle. Thank you so much for elaborating on that. So I'm going to pull it out now to the community, right? We looked at practitioners, we looked at providers, we looked at the agency institutions. Now in the community, one of your strength and area of expertise is pulling together diverse stakeholders, right? And working with them. Now, at any given table, I can tell you that there are individuals who promote racism, who's all about being racist in those groups, in groups of when we pull community meetings together. There are some who would want to promote equity and some who wants the status quo. Some who is right on board with looking at diversity, equity, inclusion, seeing their intersectionality, but at the same time, lifting them up and understanding the nuances and the complexities within each of those terms. And there's some that say, collapse them, no big deal. We get some numbers in, tokenism, we keep it moving, right? So speak a little bit about the work that you do, and how do you do this work in a way that keeps equity at the forefront with all the diverse players around the table?
You have to have community voice, and you have to bring community together with providers. That's not happening much. And I tell people about how I am truly in my baby boomer stage. It's hard for me to get used to technology, but back in the 70s and in the 80s and the 90s, we had more community conversations. We brought the community together. So many people are on social media now, so people aren't hearing community voice or aren't bringing community in. And we've gotten away from doing a lot of community outreach. That breaks my heart as a community organizer. A lot of people are afraid of the violence in the community, so they think having tokens of community people to come to their meetings is involving community, is being community, creating community integration, and it doesn't. So we really have to make sure that we have that. So I'm working on community partnerships, and that's what I'm really excited about today, is that I was finally able to solidify a community partnership with the church, with my church in particular, and with community mental health affiliates. They're coming together to talk about how can we respond to crisis in the best way, and how can we connect people to the community. So we just have to get people together with the community voice, being considered an expert on how they can be integrated into the community, how they can be served, and how their well-being and health can be sustained without them ever having to come back to the community. So this is just really great. We have that partnership with emergency medical services, and I have developed a friendship with the chief of emergency medical services. And he was really upset that they will go out to an emergency. Say someone is burned out of their house, someone has just had a death, and they have to leave. And they leave people grieving alone or having to deal with crisis alone, not knowing if anybody is going to come to their aid. Maybe Red Cross will come, maybe they will have a bed, maybe they will have a place to get displaced. But he wants to be able to work with people in the community to know that those people will be able to do follow-up, and he'll be able to hear about whether or not they were able to get their problems resolved and whether or not they were able to get back on their feet and get stabilized. And that's what we need to do with trauma-informed care if we're really going to make sure that people are able to live good lives, to achieve well-being, and their health will be sustained by them being connected to the community on a sustainable basis.
Michelle, I am grinning. I just had to move a bit there to plug in that laptop, but I am grinning because, oh my goodness, this is your life work. This is what
Yes.
you've been
Yes.
for, you've been wanting. You've hit the pavement just working this partnership development piece and recognizing that within the faith community, the resources, the strength, the capacity, the work that members in the faith community have been doing for years, but also knowing the provider world and then bringing them together. Now, Michelle, you, myself, Reverend Robin Anderson, have gone out to do training with the Imani project there, right? And you shared one of your slides that had to do with the crisis piece. When you're looking at assessment within a church area and seeing how they can respond to crisis. Can you speak to that piece of work? You're always doing the asset mapping type work out there.
Yes. We have to look at individuals holistically, and we have to look at our communities holistically. And our church can do that. And I love when you talk about the micro, macro, and meso. We have to look at all levels, and we have to look at it in the same way. And in the church, we have to look at the assets. The church represents the assets within the community. Where are the spiritual assets? Where are the people that can deal with mental health? Where are the people that can deal with substance abuse and physical health? And what if someone gets in trouble? We have lawyers in the community. We also have lawyers in the church. We really have to look at the holistic system of care and to make sure that where people are, they can do one-stop shopping. Everybody knows within the system who is excelling in that personal area or in that macro area of expertise, so that we can bring it together for individuals who are hurting, who are suffering, and who have experienced the crisis. So we need to do that in our churches. We need to do that in our community, so that as soon as someone gets into trouble or experiences that trauma, they know where to go, and that one person that they go to will be able to holistically make their treatment and well-being come to fruition.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you. I just had to get that out there because I know you're so passionate about that piece there.
Yes, yes.
So what's one of the things that, it could be a quote, Michelle, or it could be a phrase. So let's just imagine that years from now, someone or folk are going through some other kind of thing that unfortunately we know, living in this world, this kind of pandemic, trauma happens. It's not going to be the last time. What can someone look back on and hear from you about resiliency, about thriving, about coping? What can you share about lessons learned from yourself and your family that they might be able to gain from?
Well, something that I've always thought about and talked about being a community organizer is that it takes a village. And this is what I'm talking about as far as with holistic care. It really does take a village to help and to help people. It takes a united family. I love that you were going through the Kwanzaa principles, and I think about emoja with unity within the family and unity within the community and being able to call on that community at a minute's notice. Me being the church when my mother died, my church family was there. My church community came to my help. And Alice, I had shared with you before this that I couldn't get to my kids in North Carolina when it became a hot spot. And my whole family got COVID, and I could not be there to be with them. But I had community. I called on my family in North Carolina to come around my family to really be able to help. And I was just looking at the news the other night. It was just 2 nights ago when I was looking at Texas. And I had a friend in Texas, and I wasn't even thinking. I said, oh my goodness, she must be really suffering right now. And I called her just to see, how she was doing. And she did not have water and she did not have heat. And she said, what I really need, I so miss that I've never was able to connect to a community while I've been here. And she's her own consultant. She has her own business, but she does not have a church. She has no family there. And I thought so badly, how she must be suffering because she did not have community. That's a lesson, Alice. We all need to build community. And if we're going to help anybody, we need to help them to build community. That's what wraparound is all about, helping each individual to build their own support system, to build their own support community so that they never have to be alone in life after the providers leave. We replace those providers and their function with people with assets in the community. So that's a huge lesson. It's the same lesson, but it really hit me right in the middle of my head how important that is, especially during times such as this.
That's right, Michelle. And I know for some of the providers watching and who will be watching and who are familiar with the protective factors, one of the aspects is building the support network of individuals
Yes.
while they're
Yes.
in your care, while they're working with you. That should always be
Absolutely.
one of the element that's a focus, right? So with that, Michelle, I'm going to ask you to think about, I mean, you're doing so many different pieces of the work. If you think about one of the impact that you really feel good about, two things. One of the impacts, whether it's in the faith community or in your work itself or just personal, one impact that you've had um, on any platform for 2020, and then one of the items or things that you're thinking you want to do in 2021, impacting communities.
Well, building voice, building family voice, and really making sure that family voice is heard and recognized and implemented at the table. So I feel that I've been making an impact in doing that. We've slipped back into professionalizing parents, professionalizing parent voice. A lot of times people feel that parents have to be trained to come to the table, but I tell people that we have to be trained to hear parent voice. So I've been doing that. I've been making an impact to do that. And this is what I want to be able to build in 2021. And I'm starting to do that, to really build that church voice, that family, faith based voice to be able to come to the forefront, to be considered a provider at the table.
Michelle, I can't contain it. I am just so happy for you. I'm so
Thank you.
happy for you. I mean, your life's work, coming around
Yes,
that
yes,
space and to be
yes.
able to see the fruition, to see the fruit of your labor, seeing that baby growing.
Yeah,
It's really exciting, really exciting. So
thank you.
this is, you're welcome, Michelle. So Michelle, I'll give you the last word here. You get to speak to the faith community, tell them what you want to say. You get to speak to the provider world, okay? Faith community, provider world, systems folk, and parents, okay? So you have it. Speak to the faith community. It doesn't matter which way you want to do it. Faith community, the providers, the parent systems, and the parents. So go for it, and we'll wrap with this.
Okay, all righty. I appreciate it. And my logo says it takes a holistic village. It's the African proverb. It does take a village to do this work. Providers need to know that. The church needs to know that. Individuals need to know that. Everybody needs to know that. We all need support. And if we're going to do anything for anybody, we have to utilize the village. We have to work hand in hand. We have to grab each other's hand in love to be able to make sure that we're going to make a difference.
Beautiful. Well, all you've heard it from Michelle-Stewart-Copes, SEET Consultant LLC, and you can look her up, check her out, check out her work. I really appreciate you, Michelle, and best of everything.
God bless you.
God
God bless
bless
your
you, my
continued
sister.
work.
God bless you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So you have just heard from Michelle-Stewart-Cope from SEET Consultant LLC, and what a wealth of information she shared. I'm sure you can pick up the various strategies, ideas, the various tips and tactics, if you will, that she laid out for us in the different pieces of the interview that I just facilitated. I'd like to invite you to, as you watch this, that you share it with others, you subscribe to the channel. I will be posting more video interviews of individuals from across the world, bringing to you different perspectives on a variety of topics. And I'm hoping that you'll be able to learn something and share and become part of the movement, that we're not going back. The rules of engagement have changed, and we're not going back. Really need to move from words to actually doing something about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and no longer sandwiching equity, assuming that it will happen in some way, shape, or form. We must be intentional about equity, promoting equity, and showing equity across systems. My name is Dr. Alice Farrell, President of Olive Branch Clinical and Consulting Services, LLC. And until we meet again, have a good and prosperous day. Be fulfilled, and be a blessing to someone. Take good care.